Welcome to the Community Climate Hub Fall Webinar Series. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to the Community Climate Hub Initiative. My name is Dlouhy, a research intern at the Climate Reality Project Canada. Through several trainings each year, including in Denver and Seattle earlier this year, and in Pittsburgh just last month, Climate Reality trains leaders to share the urgency of and solutions to climate change. We're also helping create community climate hubs throughout the country that will raise the bar on climate action in their cities while spurring ambition at the provincial and federal levels. This webinar is part of our fall series, which you can see on our website. These webinars are meant to exchange best practices and tools that you can leverage in your own cities to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. Sign up for the upcoming webinars or explore the tools available to Hub at climatehub.ca. Today's webinar features Cara Clairman, CEO of Plug and Drive, and Jeff Turner, Transportation Consultant at DUNSKY. Following their presentations, Jerome Laviolette of the David Suzuki Foundation will moderate the Q&A session. Cara Clairman is the President and CEO of Plug and Drive, a nonprofit that aims to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles to maximize their environmental and economic benefits. Cara was the Chair of the Board of Management of Energy and Environment for the Ontario Centres of Excellence for 6 years. Prior to working at Plug and Drive, Cara was the Vice President of Sustainable Development at the Ontario Power Generation. Cara has over 20 years of experience in environmental fields in both the public and private sectors and has a background in law. Jeff Turner is a consultant at DUNSKY Energy, a company that helps its clients assess the potential for adoption of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean mobile solutions. Jeff has experience with sustainable transportation, energy storage, and demand response, and renewable energy. Specifically, Jeff is an expert in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, energy storage technology, and personal and commercial vehicle engineering. I'll now hand it over to Cara.
Well, thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, how's that look? You good?
Yes.
I'm going to assume, since I don't hear anything, that means yes.
Looks good to me, Clara.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, welcome. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about electric vehicles and their, advances so far in Canada, sort of problems and solutions, and look forward to your questions at the end. So most of you probably know that transportation is the largest GHG emitting sector. This graph is for Ontario, but it'd be similar in most provinces. Transportation is either the largest or the second largest emitting sector in every province. And it's pretty fascinating actually to look at this graph from an Ontario perspective, because it was just about less than 10 years ago that actually electricity was the largest emitting sector. And now electricity is one of the smallest emitting sectors, and it's actually one of the solutions for transportation. So a lot has changed in a short time, which gives me optimism that it can change again. So you can see we've got a big job to reduce those emissions from transportation. And in fact, Canada really can't achieve its climate goals without tackling transportation. This is a photo from a recent ribbon cutting at our Electric Vehicle Discovery Center. As you may know, Plug and Drive opened the world's first Electric Vehicle Discovery Center, which is an electric vehicle educational facility to help people learn about the environmental and economic benefits of EV and take test drives with nothing to buy. It's a no sales pressure environment, so just all the different makes and models to try. And we're having tons of fun doing it. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later. So basically 2 minutes on Plug and Drive. We focus on consumer outreach. We work with the automakers in the electricity sector. We do research, and we also work on policy, and we just opened the center. So, our focus is consumer issues, consumer awareness, consumer knowledge. And so that's mostly what I'm going to talk to you about, is how we get the consumer on board. We have honed our messages for the consumer based on a lot of different focus groups and public research, which have told us that we need to focus on very simple economic and environmental messages. So, how much money you're going to save, going to reduce emissions. It's not that hard to do. You don't have to charge that often. Most of us only charge once a week, and there are lots of makes and models available. This is the kind of messaging you'll see in our center and also on the web and lots of other places to try to help people understand that this is not that complex and that it can make a big, big difference both environmentally and in your pocket. Interestingly, it's not just good for the economy, like for your individual finances, but as you may know, electricity is a lot cheaper than gas. So of course, it's cheaper to run. But it's also good for the economy of the local community because electricity is typically made locally. And so when you plug into electricity, you're plugging into local jobs, local infrastructure. When you buy oil and gas, typically the money is sent away. So that's just one other economic benefit to switching to electric. So we've been running this EV test center for about 5 months, and so far we've given almost 2,000 test drives. We've had more than 5,000 people through the doors, and we've hosted almost 50 events. So we've learned a whole lot about what the consumers are looking for, and we've also recently done an extensive study of consumers and what they want and what they're thinking, and I'm going to share some of those results with you. When people come into the center, we ask them questions about, before and after. And these are some of the after results. And we've asked them if, after visiting the center, they're considering an EV. And 94% say yes, that their next car will be electric. And in fact, so far, 23% of the visitors have gone and bought an EV. So we're finding it's a very effective way to get people on board. This slide gives you an idea of how we're doing in Canada so far. So you can see we've got about 42,000 cars Canada-wide, that's the green, and about 13,000 in Ontario alone. And the blue are the projected sales for Ontario, and you see in the red that's Ontario's goal of 5% of all new vehicles sold by 2020. It's pretty interesting that Navigant Research is predicting we're going to go far beyond those goals, which is pretty amazing if you consider we're just at 1% now. We just passed 1% in this quarter. And the projections are we're going to do better than 5% by 2020, which is only 2.5 years away. So I think these are very ambitious, but achievable. And I think the reason Navigant predicts this is we are seeing an annual doubling now. And with all the new makes and models coming out, we're going to have, right now we're up to about 36 makes and models available in Canada. And at this time, 2 years from now, they're predicting more than 100 different makes and models, and so that's part of the reason for these this exponential growth that's predicted. I hope it's accurate. We're working very hard to make it happen. So as I mentioned, we've done some surveying, extensive surveying of both gas car drivers and EV drivers to try to improve our ability to educate people, our ability to get people to switch. And this is just a summary of some of the results. If you're interested in more details, of course, we have a full study available. But just to give you the highlights, we interviewed about 200 EV owners and 1,000 gas car owners in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, so our metropolitan area that I think the results would be similar in any of the big cities in Canada. Of course, the EV owners are who they are. The gas car owners are more stratified by, gender, by demographics, by income, by different qualities. So we have more of a mixture of people. In the EV owners, of course, they just are who they are, and they tend to be this is an early adopter crowd. So you have to remember they tend to be male. They tend to be wealthier. They tend to be very well educated. So that does affect the results that you get. So we asked them, we asked the EV owner, why did you buy an EV? And 36%, number one reason was because of the environment. They're very environmentally motivated. Interestingly, when we asked the gas car owners, 1,000 gas car owners, why did you not choose an EV? They said because they're too expensive. We expected them to say range as the number one issue. Range came in at about 12%. So range is dropping as a concern, and the big concern is cost, which makes me think that people, again, don't know about all the makes and models available. There are some very affordable ones on the market, but people have heard about Tesla, and they maybe haven't heard about the Leaf and the e-Golf, etc. And then what we found is that in Ontario, people didn't know about the rebate. So there's a very significant incentive on in Ontario, and people didn't know that. So only 5% really significantly knew about it. So that shows that they think they're too expensive and they don't know about the rebate. That's a bad combination. So we have to do better at letting people know about that. They're still a bit concerned about range. They do have a little bit of concern about that. But interestingly, EV owners on every measure drove further and more often than gas car drivers, significantly more, both for work and leisure. So it shows that the concerns about range are more psychological than real, and we have to help people get over their worry about range. The average Canadian only drives 30 kilometers a day, so it's really not an issue for most of us, but people think it's going to be an issue, and that stops them from buying the car. So that's another area we have to work on. We also asked them lots of questions about climate change. We asked them, did they care about climate change? Did they think it was a problem, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, both gas car owners and EV owners both thought climate change was a significant problem and that we had to do something about it. So that's good news. The groups were pretty much the same on that score. Where they were very different was the gas car owners did not believe that their car choice made any difference, whereas the EV owners did think their car choice made a big difference. So it shows we have to do a better job of linking their car choice to climate change, that in fact changing your car from a gas car to an EV can make a significant difference, and it really can. So we need to do a better job at helping people understand that. So in summary of the study, we have to help people know about incentives. They don't seem to know, and they also don't understand the total cost of ownership, that electricity is much cheaper than gas. People don't know that. They still have worries about range anxiety, and we have to help them understand that most of the time they don't drive very far and that they shouldn't worry about a one-off long trip. We also have to, as I said, connect the car purchase to climate change. We still do need a little bit more public infrastructure to help people get over their concerns. And if you look at our study, you'll see that EV ambassadors are really important. People talk to a friend or a colleague at work that owns an EV, they're 6 times more likely to choose EV. So we have to make better use of those EV ambassadors, those EV owners that love to talk about their car, and they're very excited about EV, and we need to sort of hone that and get that message out to all their friends and family. So in summary, we want to get to that 5% by 2020. As I said, we actually just hit 1% this month. But there's still 2 big barriers to EV uptake. Number one, and if you sum all up what I just presented, consumer knowledge is still extremely low. We have to do a better job of helping people understand what the options are, why it's beneficial, and that it helps when it comes to GHG and climate change. And secondly, we do have to help people get over range anxiety, and that means we do need a bit more public charging so that people will not be worried about that. And that's where the EV Discovery Center comes in. As I said, we're helping the consumer, and we also take our test drives on the road to communities that aren't near our center so that people in any town could get test drives in different cars. And we've done them all over Ontario and so far in 5 different provinces. So hopefully coming to somewhere near you if you haven't had the chance to test drive some different makes and models. And if your town wants an event, you should reach out to me because we're always willing to come. This just says who supports us. We're not for profit, and you always have to thank the sponsors. And so these are the folks who are helping us make it happen. I'm just going to sum up, and I'd like to take any questions you have at the end to say that we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the latest developments. I've been working in EV for 10 years, and I have to say, like the last year and a half, the number of changes that have happened make me really optimistic for the future. I think even the most naysaying auto journalist would now say the future is electric. We like to say, well, it's now, it's not necessarily in the future. But when you see countries banning gas cars and numerous different automakers committing to electrify every make and model that they make, we have a lot of reasons to be excited about the future. I'll just close with, when the CEO of Shell says his next car will be electric, big things are happening. And I think really, as I said, it's not if anymore, it's a matter of when, and we just want to make that when as soon as possible. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Climate Reality.
Thank you so much, Cara. We'll now have Jeff Turner speak to us from DUNSKY Energies.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Cara, that was really great. Yeah, my name is Jeff Turner. I'm just gonna get my screen sharing. That. Anybody able to confirm they're able to see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Great. So yeah, as the introduction mentioned, I work for DUNSKY Energy Consulting. We're a consulting firm based in Montreal. And yeah, historically, a lot of our work has been on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and more recently, we got into the world of sustainable transportation. And my own background, I just moved back to Quebec from BC. After 6 years there, I was primarily working for BC Hydro on their electric vehicle infrastructure programs. So it's been really fun to join the team at DUNSKY, where we're working for a lot of different governments and different utility companies, and yeah, trying to sort of understand what are the best opportunities for them to be able to help accelerate adoption of electric transportation and other sustainable mobility solutions. So yeah, I figured I'd start by giving a bit of context in terms of the history and some of the benefits of EVs, but the focus of my presentation, I wanted to hone in on charging infrastructure, because that's often a key question that a lot of folks have. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting topic that there's been a lot of development in. But just to start out, I always love showing this slide, which it's an ad from, I think it's the 1912 Detroit Electric, just to remind people that electric vehicles were actually around in large numbers about 100 years ago. And there was a pretty even three-way race between gas cars, electric cars, and steam-powered cars. But they largely went away once we built highways to connect our cities and folks started driving longer distances. And didn't really see much of EVs through the 20th century, except for the GM EV1. So if any of you have heard about the film Who Killed the Electric Car, this is sort of the star of that movie. And yeah, it was a bit of a false start for EVs, in that government regulations sort of forced automakers to make them available. And once those were overturned, the vehicles turned away. And I bring that up because sometimes I think people still ask, like, oh, are we just seeing another fad? Are we going to stop hearing about Tesla in just a few years? So to put that in perspective, I'm just showing the cumulative US sales of EVs. And this is from last year, so we've progressed a bit since then. But back then we were at about 500,000 cars on the road. I think globally we're at about 2 million now. And so just to show where the EV1 falls on that, there are only about 1,000 EV1s that were sold in that period. So we're really talking about something different at this point. Sales are accelerating. There are something like 40 different models available in North America from almost every manufacturer. So this is really picking up, and it's not a fad that's going to go away anytime soon. Looking at global markets, yeah, it's really exciting to see the growth year over year. Easily around 50% every year. I think right now 2017 is tracking around a 50% growth over 2016. Overall market share, though, we're approaching 1% market share, so still a relatively small slice of the pie. And so that's why, as Cara said, we really want to make sure we're accelerating this as much as possible to accelerate the greenhouse gas emission savings. And so about that, why does it make sense for us to push EVs as much as possible? And I like to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the benefits of EVs. There's been a lot of scrutiny around the benefits of EVs in the press, and I think that's healthy. It's good to make sure that we're on the right path. But unfortunately, there's also some misinformation that's mixed in there, and sowing some doubt where it's not necessary. So I like to sort of point to a few studies that have looked at some of these questions. I think that the biggest question is, the benefits of EVs in terms of the reduced energy consumption and the reduced, the associated pollution emissions from EVs. That seems pretty obvious on the surface, but it's important to ask the question about where does the electricity come from? How much pollution is generated when we charge these vehicles? And it's an important question to ask, and fortunately it's been asked, and it's been looked at over and over again by a number of reputable organizations. I like to point folks towards the Union of Concerned Scientists. They've got a study that they continually update as new data becomes available. And they're able to look at the full well-to-wheels analysis for electric vehicles to look at, how much pollution is emitted by electricity generation. As Cara mentioned, Ontario as an example is a place that's cleaned up electricity generation in a big way. And the UCS, they sort of show the results of this analysis on a map of the US that shows the equivalent fuel economy in terms of greenhouse gas emissions for a typical EV. And you can see on the map, I'll just make this a bit bigger on the next slide. Lighter blue, those are better colors. You can sort of see the equivalent miles per gallon number for an EV on those different parts of the grid. And in the best case scenario, you're talking about on the order of 100 miles per gallon. Now, of course, on some of the dirtier parts of the US grid, sort of in the Midwest, where there's a lot of coal-fired generation, the benefits of EVs, of course, are, they reduce a lot when you're running off largely on coal. And at that point, in the worst case scenario, EVs are about as good as the most efficient conventional vehicles. But what's exciting about this is that the numbers are actually improving. So the UCS is going back and redoing this analysis. It's a relatively simple analysis to do. And they're already seeing the benefits of the fact that coal plants are shutting down left, right, and center, and renewable energy is really starting to contribute in a big way. Now, to be clear, this study also isn't just looking at the emissions associated with electricity generation, but also sort of the cradle to grave aspect of, what does it take to build an EV and dispose of it at the end of its life? And again, an important question to ask. And when you do look at it, the main result is that that phase of a vehicle's life is relatively small compared to driving a vehicle over its 10 to 15 years. And so this is a graphic from Volkswagen that I've used over the years. This actually dates back to before the Dieselgate scandal, when Volkswagen was still actively trying to sell diesel cars. And you can see that they were just sort of showing a comparison of the diesel, gas, and electric versions of the Volkswagen Golf. And from their perspective, they saw that, sure, EVs take a bit more energy to manufacture, but you more than make up for that over the life of the vehicle just because they're so much more energy efficient. Another very recent study that just came out from MIT looking at full life cycle emissions for EVs just came out in the past month. And it's a great tool online that you can go to carboncounter.com. You can play around with it. And the main dashboard of this tool shows the overall life cycle emissions of a few dozen different models of vehicles. You've got cars, SUVs, gas cars, there's the black dots. We've got hybrids in pink, plug-in hybrids in dark pink, and then electric vehicles in yellow. And you can sort of play around with the overall efficiency of the grid, the cost of electricity to see how different vehicles compare. I think there's a great chance to sort of show, how does this look in the US and in Canada? And pretty much right away, you can see that on average in the US grid, EVs are already better than the best option better than the best gas-powered car. And the case only gets better when you look north of the border in Canada, where our grid is already a lot cleaner than it is in the US. And at this point, on average in Canada, an EV emits less than half the emissions of even the best gas-powered cars. And if we were to look at, say, a province like BC as an example of where we might get to with increasing penetration of renewable energy, at that point, you start to see some drastic reductions in the overall life cycle of emissions of EVs. And again, so this is taking into account not only the electricity generation, but also the energy that goes into producing and disposing of the vehicle at the end of its life. So all that to say that, EVs are there are a lot of benefits. And it's not just that they're a little bit better than gas-powered cars, they're a significant improvement. And I don't think there's an easy way for us to achieve our climate change goals without looking to electrification of transportation. I think I saw a question just came in. Yeah, from Bill Pollock. GM can answer why Ontario doesn't get the Spark EV, nor does it qualify for rebates anymore. yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll talk a little bit about barriers, but I think, yeah, in terms of supply of EVs, not every model is available everywhere, and there's certainly some challenges around making sure automakers are satisfying demand in all the markets that they're active in. But yeah, that's probably a more complicated topic than we have time for right now. Thanks, Bill. Oh, and I just thought, so this MIT, I thought this was really interesting. It's been in the news just in the past couple of weeks, this Lifecycle Emissions Analysis by MIT. It got picked up by the Financial Times, and they actually did a classic job of sort of cherry picking some data and taking the results and finding the one case where they could find an electric car, full-size Tesla luxury electric car charging on the worst grid in the US, and found that in that one specific case, that was worse than the bare bones Mitsubishi Mirage gas car. And the folks at MIT were really unpleased with that. You can see they basically said, this turns the fundamental conclusions of our research at MIT on their head, giving the public a misleading perspective on electric vehicles. You know, the Financial Times published this letter. I think they've amended the article a little bit, but this sort of gives you a feeling of some of the doubt that's cast around EVs that just isn't warranted a lot of the time, which is unfortunate. You know, there are benefits. I think Cara already talked a bit about this. A real lack of awareness of the fact that EVs are much cheaper to operate. If you crunch the numbers, you find that driving electricity is about like paying something like 20 to 40 cents per liter on gasoline. So really, you know, potential to save about $2,000 a year, depending on how far you drive. And there are a few other benefits too, you know, the convenience of being able to charge at home and waking up to a full tank. The fact that these cars are really fun to drive. I encourage you, if you're in the Toronto area, to go check out the vehicles in the Discovery Center. And yeah, depending on the taste, some people just, EV drivers, you know, environmental decisions aren't their primary motivator. Some of them just like having the latest and cool tech. So that's it's good to have that aspect on our side to help boost sales. So in terms of how we charge electric vehicles, it's a really interesting topic because I think a lot of people immediately ask the question, you know, I'm used to going to a gas station. I can count on there being a gas station just about anywhere I go. And I know that I'll fuel up my car in about 5 minutes and I'll be back on the road. And so it's, you know, so it's a really important question to ask. And I think, you know, I just mentioned the fact that, you know, it's really convenient actually to be able to charge at home. And for most EV drivers, most of the time, they don't worry about charging out on the road because they wake up to a full tank every morning, and that's actually really convenient. But it doesn't cover all scenarios, so I think it's important to explain what the different charging technologies are, because there are certainly a few challenges that need to be addressed as we look to push increased adoption of EVs going forward. These are just the 3 different categories of charging stations, some basics on EV charging. Some of you might know some of this stuff. Level 1 just basically means using a household outlet. So you can charge an EV just about anywhere, but it's a lot slower. It might be enough to charge up overnight if you're just going to work and back. But if you're getting a pure electric vehicle and you're looking to drive a significant distance, you might look to one of these level 2 charging stations. And this is something that uses a 240 volt circuit, similar to what you'd use for a household clothes dryer. And this will charge most EVs in about 4 to 8 hours from 0 to full. And finally, this last category, sometimes it's still called level 3. The technical name is a DC fast charging station. And this is the kind of thing that right now can charge a typical EV in about half an hour. And this is the kind of thing that, you know, so if you're not just going to work and back, if you're looking to go on a longer trip, this is the kind of thing that'll, you know, allow EV drivers to reach out for longer distances, and might even be a solution for some folks that don't have access to charging at home. That charging time, that benchmark of half an hour to about 80%. The interesting thing is that as EVs come to market with longer and longer ranges, that means they have a larger battery that requires more power to charge. So we are seeing an evolution in that on that side of the spectrum, that we're moving to higher and higher power charging rates, which is pretty exciting. Sometimes hear a bit about wireless charging too. Important to make the distinction between static wireless charging, which is when you're just parked, versus dynamic charging, say if you're on the road and the car is able to charge while you're driving, which is pretty exciting. This is available actually as a retrofit today. There's a company that will make it a kit that retrofits to existing EV models. And yeah, it's really just a convenience feature. I think it'll come to market fairly soon as a factory option for some higher end EVs. But you know, it's definitely got the cool factor. It might be really helpful for autonomous vehicles in the future so they can charge themselves easily. But for me, it's not that exciting to me because I don't think it's a major enabler for the technology. Just to wrap up with some of the challenges related to EV charging, there's a number of different topics here, and I'd be happy to talk further on any of them if there are any questions after the period. First of all, multi-unit residential buildings. This is a major challenge. So it's really easy to install a charging station if you're a homeowner and you have a driveway. But for folks that live in a condo building or an apartment building, if they're renters, it's really not always straightforward to be able to access charging, even if you have a dedicated parking stall. I'd say a lot of the time the challenges are less technical and more have to do with the paperwork related to ownership and whether the rules allow it. And so that's a major challenge that I think municipalities can take steps to address depending on the legislation that they have over rules inside multi-unit residential buildings. Curbside charging is also an interesting topic, especially in neighborhoods that have a lot of rely on street parking, areas without driveways. So folks that just simply have to park on the street, this is particularly the case in certain neighborhoods in Montreal. Montreal is installing about 1,000 level 2 curbside charging stations. So this can be an approach to helping out those, what we sometimes call garage orphans. I already mentioned, this move towards higher power charging rates. This is, we're seeing manufacturers talking about 400 kilowatts charging in 2019. And this is the kind of thing that'll get your car filled up in about 15 minutes. So I think just about anybody can easily kill 15 minutes with a quick bathroom stop and quick check of emails on your smartphone. It's the tricky thing with fast charging is that while it's an essential enabler for EV adoption, people need to have that infrastructure there to be able to go on longer trips. The business models that support it aren't straightforward. There's a lot of misplaced optimism thinking that, hey, you can make a fortune just by installing a charging station and collecting revenue from usage fees. That's not the case. It's actually tricky to make a profit. You hear that about gas stations too, that they make all their money on junk food. So you can imagine it's only even more so the case with electricity that's much cheaper than gas. And finally, impacts on the grid. People often ask, what's it going to take to power all these vehicles? And the quick answer is that there are technology solutions that'll help to manage the impact of EVs on the grid. And there are a number of options out there, and a number of utilities are experimenting with various solutions. And my own experience at BC Hydro was that the technology is ahead of the need. For now, EV adoption is relatively limited, and the business as usual approach is working, but there are solutions in the wings that will help optimize when charging happens, and that'll sort of minimize the peak load on the grid and potentially even make it so that your EV makes sure to charge when those wind turbines are spinning extra hard overnight or something like that. A lot of exciting solutions down the road. I want to save time for questions, so I'll skip over these last 2 slides, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about various vehicle grid integration technologies. So I'll leave it at that and pass it on to Jerome for the question session.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Jeff and Clara, for those great presentations. So we've already got a few questions, but I'm going to start with a few questions on my own to give time for people to prepare a few additional questions. So for the questions, you can ask them through the Q&A tool on the Zoom meeting or through the chat, but we really prefer you use the Q&A tool for that. And so the first question that I have can be answered by both of you. So what powers can municipality exercise to accelerate EV adoptions for their citizens?
Cara, I see you're still on mute, so I'll go ahead and answer the question first, and then you can chime in. I think municipalities have a key role to play. First of all, municipalities are actually, they operate pretty large fleets. You see a lot of, I'm in Montreal these days, City of Montreal, trucks are all over the place. So they can lead by example, certainly, by putting their own cars on the road. But in terms of what they can do for enabling EV adoption among their population, I think they have a key role to play in infrastructure deployment. They have oversight over a lot of the public spaces in cities, so things like sidewalks, parking lots, things like that. So and they also oversee a lot of the rules with respect to those areas. So I think they have a key role to play in sort of eliminating some of those regulatory barriers and enabling infrastructure deployment that'll be make it easier for charging infrastructure. Cara, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Jeff. And I think, just in addition, I would say that they can play a role in public education as well, because they have a great, ability to reach out to people. Very visible. A lot of times people, citizens visit those municipal offices for other reasons. And so it's a way to also educate the public. Most municipalities also have climate goals, so they tend to have, extra motivation to be leaders on things like their fleets and infrastructure. So even more reason to do it.
Great, thank you both for your answers. So I'm going to go to the second question. So do you think municipalities have enough resources at the moment to accelerate EV adoptions for their citizens, and if not so, what kind of demands can they do to make to provincial governments to shift resources towards EV adoptions the next election?
Well, here in Ontario, there's a green fund has just been set up for that purpose. And because we are having a cap and trade program, there's money to put towards some of these things. So we are seeing more resources going towards that. I think, municipalities usually do have resources for infrastructure. And it's, maybe we have to do a better job of, asking for that infrastructure, because, they do have to do street lights and lots of other things. But certainly they have, I think they do have the budget. It might be having to divert it from other things.
Good. Any things to add on that, Jeff?
No, I guess just based on what I saw in BC, I saw a lot of really good collaboration between the provincial government in BC and municipalities. Obviously, the focus on EVs varies considerably depending on who you are. City of Vancouver is going ahead and spending their own money on deploying fast charging infrastructure. Other smaller municipalities might not have quite as much funding set aside for those types of initiatives. But that's just one example. I think. But I think at the end of the day, municipalities and provincial governments probably have somewhat different roles to play. And for me, I think the key role that provincial governments have to play is in terms of helping address those upfront costs. And so I think it's something like 90 to 95% of the sales of EVs in Canada so far have happened in the 3 provinces that have purchase incentives to help reduce those costs. So I think other provinces in Canada definitely, and potentially the federal government as well, need to look at that gap and see what they can do there. Whereas municipalities, they can probably help focus on some of the nuts and bolts on the ground, moving things forward and raising awareness.
Great, thank you. So the rebates offered by Ontario, Quebec, and what is the third province offering rebates on?
BC and Ontario and Quebec.
Great. Yeah. Great. So one final question from me before we switch to the audience questions. Coming to the citizens, what role can citizens play to encourage best practice in the electrification of transportation?
Well, I'll take a crack at that. Actually, citizens can do a lot. First of all, as I mentioned, EV owners are great ambassadors, and people should talk to their friends and their colleagues and let them see their car, try their car. Now, not to say that EVs are, some silver bullet that are going to solve all the problems. We need to do plenty of other things as well. Like, and if people are not having cars, we don't want them to get into cars, but certainly people who do have cars, we want them to switch. So I think it's important for everyone to feel like they have a role to play. We have found, and in fact, workplace is some studies in California have shown that workplace is key. And you talk to your colleagues, they're going to try it, and they're probably going to be convinced.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just to build on the workplace point. Charging at home in a single family home driveway, that's really straightforward. Some of the other options there, workplace charging can fill a lot of gaps. And I think one role that citizens can play is any folks that are in that situation. I've been there most of my time in Vancouver. I did not have off-street parking. And I think they can look at their own personal situation, work through their building, and raise any challenges with their local government if they're having a hard time adopting an EV just because of some regulatory barrier that's getting in the way of installing a charging station at home.
Great. So thank you both for your answers. So we're going to switch to the audience questions. So I'll start with. All right. So we've got a few questions here.
Jerome, somebody asked a question also in the chat.
Yes. So,
and I sort of, instead of answering by text, I said I would answer to the group. So.
All right. So I'll read the question that was asked and the answers that you gave, so everybody can see it if they haven't seen it yet. So the question was from Carol and says, "Are you aware of any health risk to sitting so close to a powerful battery?" And the answer from Cara was, "I'm not aware of any risk when driving. Some studies have been done, which include with inductive wireless charging and people sitting in a car when that is going on. I think the jury is out on whether that causes any risk. Debates somewhat like the old EMF debates, which is if you live near high voltage power lines." So I'll switch to the other questions in the chat, and then I'll go to the Q&A in the Q&A panel. So another question from Carol: how can dealership be incentivized to sell EVs? I found dealers not be very knowledgeable about EVs. There was frequently no EV demonstrator, and long wait if you were the one. I think the Discovery Center is great, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, actually, that was really one of the reasons why, Plug and Drive started, was, to help people with this gap right now where the dealers are not very knowledgeable and often don't even have the car. What we found, we did actually do a secret shopper, and what we did find is that if they had the car, they weren't bad. But when they didn't have the car on the lot, they did tend to, of course, want to sell something they did have. So we are working on, of course, supply, because you need the cars there for them to be able to offer a test drive. And because supply is limited right now, that's why we set up the center, so people could have a place to go. Of course, the ultimate goal is to get the dealers to be the ones who do it. You shouldn't need a Discovery Center forever. That's sort of a temporary fix. And so we're actually doing a bunch of dealer training to help them do better, to help them. They're actually amazing on the features of the cars. They know all the technical features of the, whichever vehicle it is that they sell. Where they're not so great is on the, how is it good for the environment? And how much money am I going to save? Those sorts of things they tend not to know. And so that's the part where we can help them. So we're doing a bunch of dealer training. And then we're also working with the OEMs on the supply side to make sure the cars are there. And I think over time they will be. This year was rough, and we're in a supply shortage right now that it should be addressed in the next 6 months or so.
Okay. Anything to add on that, Jeff?
No, I think Cara's an expert on this. I mean, I've lived it myself for the past few months as I'm shopping for my own EV, and here in Quebec, it's the same deal where there's just EVs aren't available, and some of them don't know very much. There are a few outliers, though. I'm on a waiting list with Bourgeois Chevrolet. I know they've won the award from Plug and Drive a few years in a row, and they really know their stuff. They've embraced this, and so I think we're going to see more and more.
Amazing. And actually today there was a press release from them that they're putting in a solar canopy at their dealership.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Great. So we've got a question the first question we've had it about 20 minutes ago. So GM can answer why Ontario doesn't get the Spark EV, nor does it qualify for rebates anymore. Does any of you two know that?
Yeah, I think Jeff tried to answer that one. Actually, the Spark EV is being discontinued.
Okay, so that's something.
And so that's why, but even when it was available, it wasn't available here. So maybe that's where that question comes from. And as Jeff mentioned, some vehicles are not made available in Canada. You have to remember Canada is a pretty small market. And the automakers, to be, even though, of course, we would love it if they would bring all their cars here, if you look at it from their point of view, 33 million people in California with huge incentives and 34 million people in Canada with, 12 small markets, where would you put your cars? And you can see why they send you know, a lot more of their vehicles supply to California. It's a lot easier to sell EVs in California. So unfortunately, we sometimes just get the remnants. Although I was having a conversation with Mitsubishi today, and that Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid is coming, and they plan to have loads of them. So I think it's going to change. It is changing.
That's great to hear.
Great. All right, so next question is from Matthew, who asks, can you talk about fees for time versus paying for kilowatt hour at public chargers?
Yeah, I'd be happy to tackle that. It's an important topic. Some people often even, I think there's been a lot of confusion because a lot of public charging stations did go in the ground early on, and the folks installing them didn't even bother to charge a fee. They were just free to use. People thought that maybe the electricity companies were giving it away, but no, in that case, that would be whatever, say a restaurant that installed the charging station, they're still having to pay for all the electricity that's coming out of their panel, but they might have been giving it away at the charger. I think it's important that that was a nice honeymoon phase, but for the market to develop more naturally, I think usage fees are a good thing. Because you can end up with situations, if they're free to use, people can tend to abuse them. They might leave their car there all day long, and that's not a good use of the investment. But the question here is specifically about how should we pay? What should those fees look like? And the question becomes, should it be based on the actual energy that you consume, which seems pretty natural? But in other cases, folks have argued for charging a fee based on the time that you're connected to the charging station. So both approaches have their benefits and drawbacks. I think the nice thing about paying on a per kilowatt hour basis, so based on the amount of energy that you consumed, is that you always know what you're going to get. If your car slows down because it's ramping down, or the battery is cold and it's not able to charge quite as fast as it would otherwise, you're still going to pay the same amount just to get the same amount of energy. The challenge is that, or what's better about charging by time is the fact that, first of all, you're motivated to move your car once you're done charging. If you've charged up in half an hour, but you're not going to be back for another hour or two, but if you know that you're paying on a per time basis for that charging station, you might be inclined to come back and move your car and make it available for the next person. So that's how things work on the ground from the perspective of the customer. The other aspect here is what's allowed in your jurisdiction based on the regulatory environment around utilities. And in some cases, utilities have argued that this is a service that only utilities should be able to offer. And in other jurisdictions, like in Ontario, the regulator has said that, you know what, no, this is sort of different. You can go ahead and charge a fee, and this isn't a regulated commodity, and you can charge whatever kind of fee you want. But there is sort of a regulatory layer there that has proven to be a bit of a barrier in a few cases. So it's it's a really interesting topic, but I think both of those approaches work, and I think it's important that we establish fees that make sense.
Right. I agree, Jeff. I think electricity is not free, and it's important to send the message that it's not free. It has costs and it has consequences, so you don't want to make it free. The problem actually, to your point, when some of those early stations were free, what we found was people would go and charge during the day at the free stations instead of charging at home at night. And from an environmental point of view, the nighttime power is the lowest emitting and the least cost and all those things. So we actually want to incent people to charge at those off-peak times, not on peak. And so, we don't want to motivate the wrong behavior by making it free in the daytime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right about the motivation to move your car. I was charging in Ottawa recently, and I got a text to my phone saying your charging is done and you'll keep paying every hour. And I thought, oh man, I gotta get back there and move my car. So it definitely is a motivator.
Excellent. So that's interesting, because I'll skip to a question which is about incentives for businesses to install EV infrastructure for customers and or staff, since we know that they can't really make money out of that. No. So is there any incentives for them?
Yeah, so there are workplace incentives in some jurisdictions for the charging infrastructure. In fact, Ontario is poised to roll out some incentives for workplaces to install. I know BC has had some over the years. Some places are providing infrastructure related incentives, like some of the money for the infrastructure, which is a plus.
Good. Have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, Quebec also has a program on that front, and I think what's exciting is that employers are recognizing this as an opportunity to attract and retain staff. This is a good feature that can appeal to new employees. So,
right.
So that's a great plus. Excellent. So we've got a question about from Louis Simon, but I'm not sure to understand a question. Maybe you guys, you both do. So he says only about 10% of gas-powered equivalents. Was that a follow-up question on something that you already answered, Jeff, you think?
I'm wondering if that might be just in reference to the overall emissions, possibly.
Yeah. Well, in Ontario, it's about 90% reduction. In Quebec and Manitoba and BC, it's even a bit better than that. Other provinces with more emitting grids, as Jeff sort of pointed out, with the different grids, it's a little less of a reduction, but still a good substantial reduction, even in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
I think the 10% was referring to a question that was asked by Sandy earlier about maintenance costs.
Yes. I mentioned the 10%. So there's a really great video on YouTube, if people are interested, by a guy named Tony Seba, S-E-B-A. I don't know. It's like about disruptive technologies. It's really, really interesting. But one of the things that comes out of that video is that gas cars have about 2,000 moving parts and EVs have about 20. And so when it comes to maintenance, there's just very few things to break and very few things to fix. And so although, like, people say, well, to be really honest, I mean, the EVs have only been out since 2011, 2012. We don't really know the full story on maintenance yet because they're not that old. But, all evidence points to the fact that the maintenance costs are likely to be in the ballpark of 10 to 20% of what a gas car is, maybe even less than that. So I know for myself, like, I've basically had none. And I've had an EV since 2011. So I know that it's low, but like I said, the cars are still relatively new.
So it's still something we'll see over time.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. If you do so have one, please manifest yourself now. Since we have still a couple of minutes, I'll go to one last question with a quick answer, maybe from both of you. So what are the costs and tons of greenhouse gas emissions reduced of the various methods of encouraging EV?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, first of all, how effective are the different methods of encouraging EV adoption? We don't really know. That takes a lot of work to understand, hey, how much does a $5,000 incentive move EV adoption? How much does having an effective and efficient charging network support EV adoption? There's a bit of research into there. It's stuff that we've been doing a bit of at DUNSKY ourselves, but I don't think there are any firm numbers there that tell us, exactly how much each of those measures really support EV adoption. I think, there's been a lot of discussion about purchase incentives as being a particularly expensive way to achieve carbon reductions. And I think one thing that's sort of left out of that discussion is the notion that, these incentives aren't intended to stick around forever. Incentives are meant to really transform a market. When you don't have that momentum, Cara was talking about, how can automakers send cars our way if there's just not enough volume up here. So I think incentives can really help transform the market, raise awareness, and get the ball rolling. But certainly they should phase out. In the US, they might phase out all of a sudden very abruptly. We'll see how this bill works out in the US. But originally, if that doesn't happen, the plan for their federal incentive was that incentives would ramp down over the course of a year and they would get cut in half twice before ramping it out completely. So I think it's, purchase incentives are a key ingredient, but they can look particularly expensive if you look on a per car basis. But I think you just need to sort of look at the longer term and understand that this is, a step towards getting to deeper market penetration in the long run.
Right, exactly.
Meanwhile, charging infrastructure, it might seem like an expensive venture, but it's actually really not. If you look at what Ontario has accomplished with a $20 million program, and the province has basically blanketed in fast charging infrastructure pretty effectively at this point, it's really doesn't take that much money to put these things in the ground. On a one-for-one basis, it can seem expensive, but compared to some of the other investments in infrastructure, it's relatively small, and it's considerably less expensive than the incentive programs.
Okay, great. So a new question just popped up. So first, what car do you drive, Cara?
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I have two EVs. I drove a Nissan Leaf since 2011. So I've had one of the first Leafs that came out, so first generation Leaf. And just this year in March, I got my Chevy Bolt. So, you know, I've got sort of one of the very first, and I've got the most recent, I guess. So, you know, a lot of improvements in the 6 or 7 years since I got my first one, a lot more range. But the Leaf, actually great car also, great city cars, got a shorter range, but most of us, you know, for a lot of us who are just doing local commuting, it's perfect. I've had no problems with either. We decided to keep the Leaf though, because now I have a 20-year-old kid who I'm hoping will get a license at some point who could drive that one. So we hung on to the second car.
Excellent. So one last question that just popped up. Can you talk about battery disposal issues? I believe, Jeff, you can answer that?
Yeah, sure. No, that's an interesting topic. I think, so, you know, I was talking a bit about the full cradle to grave, and of course the end of life is an important piece of that picture. What's really exciting with batteries is that, so Cara, for example, I don't know how the battery on your Leaf is doing after 5 or 6 years, but, you know, you can imagine that an electric vehicle, if the battery is now only holding, say, 75% of the charge that it used to, maybe that gets to a point where it's like, this isn't good enough for me. I need a new battery for my car. That is still a very valuable piece of equipment that, for example, you could hook it up in your basement, maybe have a source of backup power for your home, or maybe you could group them together and the grid could benefit from some storage to absorb renewables and accommodate variable renewables. So there's certainly a very exciting second life opportunity for EV batteries. But eventually, of course, you know, you do have to close the loop, and yeah, batteries are recyclable. In fact, lead acid batteries that we use in conventional vehicles have an extremely good recycle rate. They're just, you know, they're valuable, and there's an industry for collecting that value. And you can bet that's going to be the case with lithium-ion batteries as well. And so I think we've seen that, you know, baked into some of these massive battery plants that are coming online. And right from the start, they're talking about, you know, including an avenue for collecting old batteries and incorporating them back into the cycle. Interestingly, there's actually a Canadian company called Retrieve Technologies based in BC. I haven't heard too much from them lately, but I know that they are one of the companies that come up if you look into lithium-ion battery recycling. So I think we'll probably hear more of them once there are more EVs on the road and there are more batteries to recycle.
Yeah, these are very good initiatives, and we hope to see much more. All right, so that will close the question session. I think Audrey from Climate Reality.
We are running out of time, but I wanted to let you know before Alexa concludes, most of our attendees tonight are likely aware that this webinar is a part of a larger series that we host as part of our community Climate Hub campaign. So some of you are already part of a hub, but if you're not part of a hub, if you haven't signed up yet, it's not too late to do so. You can either join a hub that already exists, or you can start a new one if you're in a city where no hub currently exists. So go check that out, climatehub.ca. So basically, climate hubs already exist in 6 Canadian cities, and they aim to accelerate their municipalities' progress along a 5-milestone framework of measuring emissions, setting a reduction target, drafting a plan to meet that target, and then implementing the plan and monitoring the progress. And so if that sounds like something you'd like to do to accelerate climate action in your community, join us and keep joining us on these webinars. On that note, I'm going to leave it up to Alexa to conclude briefly.
Thank you for being with us, especially to Cara, Jeff, and Jerome. We really appreciate having you online. We hope you've come away with knowledge and inspiration to get active in your community, and we invite you to sign up to join a hub at climatehub.ca. Our next English webinar is on Tuesday, November 28th at 5 p.m. Eastern, and features Amir Nostrat of Climatable, who will present an innovative project he and fellow graduate students launched in 2015 to get their peers engaged with climate negotiations. Our next French webinar is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern and features Catherine Potvin to address Canada's enormous potential to decarbonize its electric grid and become a world leader in exporting renewable electricity. You can sign up on that same site, climatehub.ca. Thank you again for being with us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.